what is the root of evil that fosters totalitarian ideology? Could it be simply that people are born evil? Or, as Hannah Arendt proposes, is it a banal aspect of the human condition? Hannah Arendt was born in Germany to a Jewish family and was a political theorist whose works delve into the relationship of power and evil, specifically through a political lens. A frequent subject of Arendt was the idea of totalitarianism, and related it back to events and actions in order to develop a deeper understanding of its true origins. Her philosophy is not easily categorized, and she even protested the idea that she may be a philosopher at all. She didn't believe that she was accepted in the circle of philosophers at the time, nor did she want to be associated with them. Instead, she thought of herself as a political theorist and separated herself from traditional ideologies and schools of thought. If she were to be classified, her theories would identify closely with civic republicanism, which is also known as civic humanism. So what is that? To put it simply, it's a principle that was brought to light in the Renaissance, but it was actually inspired by governmental policies of the period of classical antiquity and thinkers such as Aristotle, Plato, and then later on Machiavelli. It emphasizes the need for intersectionality between civic participation and individual freedom, all for the common good. Arendt was determined in her belief that human freedom could not, under any circumstances, including under totalitarian governments, be extinguished. Her first and one of her most famous novels, The Origins of Totalitarianism, discussed the history and the circumstances behind the rise of totalitarian regimes. In this book, she's adamant about a revival of a form of government that revolves around autonomy, active citizenship, and human dignity. She argues that a key to totalitarian governments' hold on its masses is propaganda and lies, as shown in this quote from the book. And I quote, "The point is that both Hitler and Stalin held out promises of stability in order to hide their intention of creating a state of permanent instability." End quote. Another important work of Arendt's was Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil, where she controversially raised the idea that evil was not necessarily inborn. This book was a collection of Arendt's reportings of the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a high-ranking Nazi official who was hanged for his crimes against humanity in Israel. Arendt reported on the trial for The New Yorker and later compiled her findings into a book that became well known for its contentious ideas. The banality of evil in the title is intriguing and is one of her most famous theories. Arendt found Eichmann to be a perfectly normal, albeit boring, man who was, in her words, neither perverted nor sadistic, but terrible and terrifyingly normal. She describes Eichmann as banal, for he did not take initiative in the acts he was being indicted for, and because of the way in which he speaks. This is an excerpt from her book describing Eichmann's reasoning, and I quote, "He, Eichmann, was perfectly sure that he was not what he called an innerer Schweinhund, a dirty bastard, in the depths of his heart. And as for his conscience, he remembered perfectly well that he would have had a bad conscience only if he had not done what he had been told to do, to ship millions of men, women, and children to their deaths with great zeal and the most meticulous care." End quote. He saw what he was doing as his duty and never questioned it. And since Eichmann was but a simple, average man, what does that say about human nature? Is this form of evil naturally human? And yet, it is fair to say that Hannah Arendt believes that man is basically good, and that things like love and friendship are far more human than evil. Evil is indeed formed simply by prejudices, cliches, social norms, and more, and is continuously fed by thoughtlessness, which is shown well in the case of Eichmann, in which case, according to Arendt, evil can technically be unlearned. Totalitarian and fascist regimes aren't only represented in real life. In fact, many movies, including children's movies, depict forms of these ideologies. In my opinion, the movie that represents it in the clearest way is The Lion King. Scar is the antagonist of the movie, and his character is clearly based on totalitarian rulers. And here's why. Scar is power-hungry and filled with vengeance and rage. His main desire is for the throne and the power that comes with it, and he will stop at no lengths to achieve what he wants. Anyone can now see how he shares similar morals with fascist, totalitarian leaders. And while it is probably too broad of a generalization, as Disney villains such as Scar in no way compare to real-life leaders who have committed terrible atrocities, it is indeed interesting to bring about similarities to have a deeper understanding of these ideologies and to understand how the media has shaped our minds, especially as children, and formed our inherent biases on what is good and what is inherently bad or evil in this case. Some examples of this totalitarian ruling in The Lion King can be shown in the song Be Prepared that Scar sings. So we see in the song, we see an army of hyenas marching in a sort of goose step march, which is an obvious nod to the Nazi regime, as well as the fact that Scar is seen sitting on a high pedestal overlooking his followers. This is very much a nod to Hitler and to his followers as well. As well as this, the lyrics, which are, and I quote, "A shining new era is tiptoeing nearer. I know it sounds sordid, but you'll be rewarded when at last I am given my dues and injustice deliciously squared." End quote. The hyenas are obviously impressionable, and Scar uses that to his advantage. This can be seen in the Nazi regime as they work to persuade the masses through the use of propaganda and rewards for their fidelity. In regards to Arendt's theories on evil and on the banality of evil, Disney villains portray a very simplistic concept of good versus evil. In Disney films, the good and the bad are often incredibly easy to distinguish. Moreover, the villains are also rarely given redemption and are deemed blatantly evil with no hopes for change. And then these villains are often killed off in some fantastical Disney way at the end of the film. This is very different compared to Arendt's writings on evil. In almost every film, Disney villains are given some sort of traumatic backstory that justifies their actions, which is in agreement with Arendt's understanding that man is basically good. On the other hand, with respect to Arendt's theories, Disney fails to acknowledge that evil can also be banal. In other words, ordinary people acting thoughtlessly with seemingly no conscience telling them right from wrong, such as the case of Eichmann. But this evil is somehow even more terrifying, especially for young children. The idea of real-life evil that can hide in plain sight without magic or fantasy, but instead is formed by pure terror and hatred, is much too grim a reality.